Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all who have joined. I will just start straight in and share my screen and talk less about me and more about whales. Let's see. And here we are, Happy Whale. And tell me, is this advancing? All good?
Perfect.
Yes.
Great, good, good, good. Great. So straight into it. I think most folks here know a lot about humpback whales, and B, a fair decent bit about happy whales. So I'm kind of gonna breeze by that bit. But the heart of it, to me, yeah, thank you for that introduction. I mean, this has just been the most incredible time of my life, these last years of doing a PhD, diving into whale science. It was really motivated by was when I started going to Antarctica in the early 90s, mid 90s, 1994. We saw virtually no whales. We saw no whales around the island of South Georgia. We saw very few whales along the Antarctic Peninsula, but that began to change. And over the stretch of decades, it had turned into now, along the Antarctic Peninsula, it's whale soup. It's just thick with incredible numbers of humpback whales. To me, it's one of the greatest environmental stories of our time. It's such an incredible recovery. And I wanted to know more about it. So I really just like, okay, well, how can that happen? And this is, to like make that long story short, this is what's come of it. So my goal here, honestly, is that we start treating the ocean like it is our home, because it is. We start treating the oceans, really, the notion of treating the ocean like a place we care about, like it is a part of our home, is really what our goals are here. And I think we're doing that, achieving that, or contributing to that, both through science and education. And I think the two dovetail really beautifully. So very briefly about Happy Whale, what the mechanics of this are. The obvious one, humpback whales make photo ID pretty easy. And photo ID is the recognition of an individual over time based on natural markings. So up here at the top left, you've got Frosty, which is, I think, the first whale I ever matched, which is why I'm particular fondness for it. And you can see Frosty named by the little snowman on the right fluke. I think it was Kate Spencer, actually, who named Frosty, naturalist in Monterey Bay. Those are barnacle scars acquired probably when the animal was pretty young. So what you have are features, natural features like pigment, like that, most of that white on the sides, scars like the entanglement scar on the left fluke, the barnacle scars here and there. Most of those are acquired when the whale is young, and then persistent features like that trailing edge that will change a bit over the lifetime. But the great thing is we can literally ID the animals, sometimes as newborn calves, certainly at sort of 6 months or so, we find a really high successful match rate from first summer all the way on through life. And certainly after their first year, we're consistently able to identify them for the rest of their lives, completely non-invasively. So this technique is forever old. This technique is, 50 years old and then some. Chuck Giraz and Steve Katona in the Pacific and Atlantic, respectively, were among the first to recognize, hey, look, these are the same animals. We're seeing them. We're identifying them year after year. And it built and built into photo catalogs. And the work that this project is very much foundationally based on was the Splash Project, 2004 to 2006. And Splash manually identified 18,000 encounters. In those 18,000 encounters, found 8,000 whales. And if you can imagine, it's one thing to look through a local catalog of 50 or 100 or a few hundred whales, but at that scale, it's an hour per photo, right? And so that might be pretty quick to find a match, but if you don't find a match, how do you know that that whale's new or that you just missed the match, right? And that's where that part would take well over an hour. By automating this, which is basically the first major step of what all I was a part of here, is we basically turn that into instantaneous, and it's just I mean I get goosebumps all the time, out on a boat. It took us a while. It was 2019 when we got that really working. And then in the forthcoming years, I think it was 2021 when we managed to get it working so effectively that we could have it accessible via app so that it could be out on the water, photograph the back of, photograph the whale, photograph the back of a camera, send it off to image recognition, and boom, there you're still looking at the whale and you know who it is. I mean, it just tickles me. So I love that. And I love that we've been able to make that accessible to naturalists and researchers and let people find their own best use of the ID. For us on this end, really the goal has been making it a positive experience, or the method has been making it a positive experience for anyone who might take that photo, submit it to Happywhale, and then, or the researchers who hand me a hard drive or send me a Dropbox link or whatever with thousands of photos, and then they can see everywhere their whales have been. They can be part of these research collaborations that have been just absolutely amazing, and follow their whales, whether it's one individual or hundreds. And then we get incredible resources for population data. So my goal here tonight with you is to kind of give you a little walk through what we've done in particular in the last year and some. One paper that we published in February, the title of this talk is the title of that paper, Bellwethers of Change, about North Pacific humpback whale populations. And then also a paper that is, I just actually, what I hope is the final draft, sent it out to our 75, I think, co-authors. And that is about migratory patterns in North Pacific humpbacks. And a lot of the migratory patterns are well known, but there's some real insights here, and I'll dig into that a bit further along. So first, just kind of walking through this, what do we got? Well, the thing about automating this is it kind of cracked a bottleneck, right? If you have to spend an hour per photo, you're just not going to deal with all the photos you can possibly get. But when we crush that down into something virtually instantaneous, we're able to do this. Whoops, that went the wrong way. We're able to do this. We're able to make one global catalog. And there's now just over 105,000 identified humpback whales in this. It's almost every population in the world. We have worked with. The one population we really had nothing for was the Oman whales, and we've worked with them a bit, and pretty interesting isolated population. But for the rest of the world, what has been just so delightful is taking data deficiency and turning it into abundance. And it's actually something that I'm kind of grappling with now, is instead of gosh, wouldn't it be great if, now it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this landslide of data? And I actually feel that to some extent, much of the data that we have is underutilized because, well, to some extent, it is a complex database. There's a lot of opportunistic aspects about it, a lot of a lot of spatial biases and such. Obviously, you're gonna find the whales where you are, and that means that outer coastal continental shelf, Alaska, remote Aleutian Islands, yeah, there's not so much effort there. Whereas in Monterey Bay, Newport Beach, Maui Nui Channel, Juneau, Alaska, yeah, we know those whales awfully, awfully well. But the cool part of it is we now just have this incredible resource. In the North Pacific, we have identified 35,000 whales. Well, the current population estimate as of 2021 is 26,000 whales. So obviously, many of those whales are no longer alive. But the reality is that we have ID'd almost every living whale in this ocean. And I just love that because, it's funny, when Phil Clapham, my major professor in all of this, I mean, amazing amazing how much I've learned by, sort of working with and then sort of standing on the shoulder of giants and that whole cliche thing. But Phil, when I said I want to ID every whale in the North Pacific, he's like, "Oh, you're crazy." And it was, something said flippantly, jokingly, not something we actually thought we would do. So what we've been able to do, and especially in the more well-sampled areas, which, as you can see from this map, Eastern and Central Pacific, Western Pacific, I think population density-wise is lower than over here. And we do have actually, this is a bit old, we have quite a bit more data than is presented here. But there is a definite bias towards the places that people are and are connected to Happywell and such. What's been really great with this is, is one part this, to me, it's like this treasure chest that I get to stick my hands into daily, but it's also the real joy of it has been not doing it alone. Actually, we posted this in the Happy Whale social media, and I saw comments. Someone very, very kindly said, "Never underestimate what one person can do." And I'm like, well, I agree with that, but this is not one person at all. And I think I'm, sort of the face of and well, I hope there's a humpback that's the face of Happy Well, but I'm certainly a spearhead of it. But really, it's the shared efforts, the collaborations, the bringing research together. Here, Paul Wade and John Callum-McKittis, certainly two giants as far as all this goes, and being able to contribute meaningfully to their work and understanding has been a real treat. So into the heart of it, the thing with these whales, the thing about that whole idea of treating the ocean like it's our home, like it's a place we care about, well, it's easy for us to not, because the problems that the oceans face and the animals that call it home are easily out of sight, out of mind. And pardon the rather graphic image here, but the obvious ones, as far as humpback whales are concerned, the two biggest, very direct impacts of them are ship strikes and entanglements. And ship strikes, this is actually a Burdus whale, not a humpback, but it's just so very blunt. These whales, they die of blunt force trauma at the hands of cargo ships and giant cruise ships and smaller vessels as well. But and how does that happen? Well, I've heard, oh, I hear they're so smart. Why don't they get out of the way? Well, I mean, I sort of think I'm reasonably smart as well. But look, if my if my dinner was on the middle of the freeway and I had to go into the middle of that freeway every single day to eat, it might not work out too well at some point, right? And kind of the like, why don't the ships get out of the, steer around the whales? Well, like what? Let's think about the weight ratio here. You know, a great whale, the largest animals that have ever lived, compared to a cargo ship, it's like a tin can to a car, right? So, I mean, let's say you had a train going through your dining room and living room every day, right? And that's the reality for these. We are urbanizing the oceans, and we are entangling whales. And boy, um, not a pleasant way to go as far as this goes. This is a whale by the name of Scarlet who did actually free herself, and disentanglement efforts clearly save these whales individually, but the vast majority of entanglements are not witnessed. Maybe 10% are, and that's hopeful. That's optimistic. In 2016, 71 entanglements were recorded on the U.S. West Coast. If we're detecting 10% of them, that'd be 700 entanglements. Not all of them, obviously, not all of them are fatal. Scarlett did free herself, but she was so traumatized by it. She lost so much body condition by this that she, in fact, died the following spring. And you could pretty well chalk it up to, she was in perfectly good condition and then she died. That just she actually slammed into the port of Long Beach, if I remember. Someone in the audience surely will know specifically the story here. But well, okay. So these are the two biggest impacts that we see very directly in these whales. And they are important and important for us to respond to and manage and control and react to. But I actually want to make the argument that an even more out of sight, out of mind issue is actually a greater threat to the oceans, to the great whales, and to marine mammals worldwide today. And I will dig into that further along. First, I want to talk a little bit about some of the information in Happywhale. That some of the great stuff that we have found here. A lot of this was well known, but it's I think it's more accessible than ever. So and individualized. So here is your classic California whale. Like by the numbers, this is the most common pattern that we see in migratory patterns of and our own encounter experience of California whales. And I will focus on California whales. I'm sure there's folks from maybe a few from around the world here, but being that this is ACS Orange County and so on, we'll focus here locally. Frosty here again, one of my favorites. She's been seen, here you go, 149 times in Monterey Bay, once up in the Farallones, once down near San Luis Obispo, and once in Cabo, and a handful of times in Vallarta, and once down further south, southern Mexico, Guerrero area, right? So that's really, really common, right? So a whale that is seasonally migrating, and the high sighting rate in Monterey Bay is certainly because Frosty is a Monterey Bay local, but it's also because there is a lot of effort there. Does she spend an equal amount of time around the Farallones? Maybe, but there's just not nearly as many boats out there, much more difficult conditions. So we just don't have as much detection, right? So then looking a little closer to many of the folks there, Orange County waters, one of your whales, Top Gun. And here is one of these super unusual patterns. In fact, a unique one, Top Gun. Oh, actually, I meant to put in an image of the whale as a calf because Top Gun was seen, or at least first summer, in Russia and in the Commander Islands off of Russia, Russian waters. We aren't getting data from Russia anymore, thanks to the Ukraine war and global tensions and blah, blah, blah. It's a lesser consequence of this war, but it's been tough for scientific collaboration across the oceans. So Top Gun was first seen around the Commander Islands, brutalized by killer whales there, and maybe because of that, I don't know, couldn't really speculate, or I can speculate, but I can't really read the mind of the whale, relocated entirely across the ocean to Southern California, seen there quite a few seasons, and once down in Cabo San Lucas, which, by the way, Cabo is a wonderful place to whale watch, but it's complete confusion as to where the whales are from. It's very much like LAX. Like you have whales from Alaska there, you have whales from Russia there. They're passing through. It's a migratory corridor. You see breeding behavior, but you have whales coming from all parts of the world. And it's like sitting in a terminal in LAX going like, well, that person might be going to Vegas, but that one, who knows? They might be going to Singapore. Much the same, really. And some of those whales are going down. Oops, I don't think my mouse is visible, but some will go straight down to the offshore islands of Mexico. I'll talk about that a bit more elsewhere. But so to speak very specifically to Orange County waters, I think I'd use a little bit of a broader, might have been some, proper LA County waters and stuff, but 369 whales have been identified in those waters looking at all time in this database, right? Of those whales, that one, Top Gun, came from Russia as a calf or as a juvenile. We've had just a spattering of whales up in Alaska. As you get further south into, say, the Salish Sea, get a few more migratory connections there or variants, like maybe they're migrants, maybe they're vagrants, but then pretty solidly you see California and Oregon are where our whales feed. This was actually news to us in the greater sense. I wasn't a whale scientist by any regard at that time, but the Splash study, 2004 to 2006, at that time we thought humpbacks did what gray whales do, which is cruise along the California coast. Okay, maybe they're feeding some, but they're on their way to Alaska. Not so. Our whales are our whales, and they are very much California whales that then migrate down into Mexico, mostly breeding along the central and northern Mexican coastline. Um, of those 369 whales, we have seen 203 of them in wintering areas. So well over 50% of them we have seen in wintering areas. Of those, two have been seen in Hawaii, and 202 have been seen in Mexico or Central America. So if you're a California whale, you're not going to Hawaii. You're just not gonna, 1%, half a percent. Um, and but you're certainly going to be wintering in Mexico. About a quarter or a third of our whales will travel as far south as southern Mexico, Central America. And interestingly, we now consider North Pacific humpbacks mostly not endangered. The Hawaii Pacific population is considered fully recovered. The Mexican population, Mexican mainland population, is considered still threatened, while the Central American population is considered endangered. That's pretty confusing, though, because the Mexican and Central American populations completely mix, or quite a lot mix. Now, one of the things that our whales do not do is what this Salish Sea, Washington, British Columbia whale does. And this whale is named Gnarly. You can see why. A pretty gnarly attack. And it's actually, if you saw the tail in profile, it's all warbly from a pretty brutal killer whale attack, or yeah, probably, or maybe it was an entanglement that actually deformed the tail. I'm going to go with killer whales on that one. But here you got Gnarly's migratory pattern, seen quite a few times in Mexico and just barely down into Central America, which is increasingly unusual for northern whales there. Central American whales are very, very strongly California whales, those endangered creatures. Now, Gnarly migrates up, obviously, to the Salish Sea. Notwithstanding what the map shows, Gnarly does not take the Pacific Crest Trail north. I think that'd be really cool, maybe a little messy. Um, but Gnarly goes up the coast, but does not feed along the way, or at least not come into, say, Monterey Bay, Channel Islands, your waters, Orange County waters, Oregon waters. What we don't see is feeding in migratory corridors. What we do see is breeding behavior in southern migratory corridors. So this scene, you kind of got this bifurcation in behavior. Once they're in these northern waters, feeding area waters, they're traveling to their destination. But when they're down in the party lands, in the warmer waters, the migratory destinations for winter, for breeding, they're engaging in breeding behavior along the way. So those Central American whales are partying down in Vallarta and getting into rowdy groups in competitive chases all along the way down. Are they actually mating? Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. So I love this because here we have literally one of the most well-studied cetaceans, and there's so many mysteries, lots of which I'm not really going to talk about, like why they sing and stuff like that. But this is new. This is unpublished as of yet. It's in a paper that I hope to be submitting in a couple weeks. Most of this is very well known. Most of this was known from the SPLASH study published in 2007, right? Which is that they have structured migratory patterns, and they're complex structures, right? It's not Hawaii whales only go to Alaska. It's Hawaii whales go mostly to Alaska. A high percentage of them that go to Southeast Alaska, Northern British Columbia, but quite a lot of them go to the Commander Islands. Quite a lot of them go to the Aleutians. Quite a lot of them go, further south, like British Columbia, Washington. Almost none of them come to California. Um, and so you kind of have the further, logically, the further west you are as a breeding whale, the West Pacific, you're more likely to go to a Western feeding area. That's not at all surprising. But what is awfully curious is, gosh, the Mexican offshore islands, which are really not very far. That's that orange circle down in the bottom there, bottom right. Those whales do not come to California, like almost none of them. And they do very much go to Alaska and the Commander Islands of Russia as well. So why would those whales go all the way across the oceans? Well, I can't say a whole lot about the whys. Why they migrate, well, I think it's skin condition, calmer, warm waters for having the babies. I think the skin condition argument one is probably the one of the best. I think social reasons are there, but again, I'm not going to talk so much about why. The what, I mean, it's remarkable to me that there is still so much unknown in the what. What do they do? Right? So we have now really conclusively mapped out where the whales go, and there's pretty much nowhere that has been unsampled here. So, but the patterns are complex, right? So, kind of piecing this all together, right? So our goal was to get as much data together, and in order to to really better understand the status of the populations and some of the questions that were left unanswered by the Splash Project. So I want to talk about populations here because this was the big revelations that we had published in February. If you go back a ways, like, so here's the crazy thing. I mean, that whole story about, treating the oceans like a place we really care about. How wonderful is it that these whales survived? We really tried. We really tried to eliminate them. There were, as far as the great whales go, I don't think there's any great whale population that survived industrial whaling with more than 5% of their pre-whaling numbers. Minkies would be the exception there, but all the larger species just brutalized. And we say decimated, that's a common line, decimated. Well, that means 10% killed, right? We're talking at the extreme, Antarctic blue whales probably down to 0.1 to 0.3% of their pre-whaling numbers. Like, what does your town look like if for every 1,000 people there's one left? What would that do to your culture? Like, how crazy is that we took out 999 or 997 out of 1,000 of those whales, right? North Pacific humpbacks shooting from the hip. The population estimate when whaling ended was about 1,000, 1,200 whales. I think that's about 3% of the pre-whaling numbers. I think that 97% of them were removed. Whaling started here pretty far back in the 1800s, so there was a pretty long stretch of time. I think these whales lost a lot of their culture, like feeding techniques and such. We don't have bubble netting whales in California. I'm going to bet if you turn if you turn the planet back 250 years, I'm going to bet that there were bubble net feeding whales in California. I don't know. Hard to say. Nobody has a record of that. But this graph was published in our paper in February, and again, this was among 74 co-authors. 70s, there was this, couple population estimates in the low thousand range. In the 1990s, John Calmakitis led research, John and Jay Barlow and crew estimated 7,000 whales in the early 90s, published in the late 90s, and with a decent growth trend. There was good science around that, although not all areas were sampled. 2002 to 2004, the one line there with the lowest error bar, it was estimated that there were about, I think, 18,000 whales. Was it 20? I'm sorry. I think 18,000 with a solid growth rate. Growth rate, I think, of 8% or 6%. 6%. I meant to look that up. It's been a little while since I talked about this. Sorry. but a solid growth trend. But still, it was a single point and a slope, a point and a slope. So that was huge, and it was really good science. But what we really were thinking is like, hey, if we got enough data together, we could do this year by year and see what's happened. And that was the goal. And we did, and we were stoked. And then we ran the numbers and we looked at the results and we said, wait, what's this? And what we really didn't factor in was, well, what's this? This is the largest marine heat wave ever recorded. We think of heat waves as a weekend or a long week, or like, oh my God, Phoenix was brutal this summer, right? 113 days above 100 degrees. I mean, that's multiple heat waves and stacked on top of each other. I mean, if you say a heat wave to me, I think of a really rough 4 or 5 days. This was 3 years of anomalously warm weather warm water stretching from the Gulf of Alaska down to the California coast. It had consequences here. Whales were further inshore because of the anchovy cycles. But the consequences in terms of the humpback whales were really further north. And this is what we saw. Literally, it's classic. I mean, people talk about, the vision is science has this aha moments, but mostly it has the, hey, what's wrong with this moment? Where did we make a mistake moments? And then trying to, discover our mistake and finding out, no, this does appear to be reality. What happened because of that heat wave is the loss of about 20% of the North Pacific's whales, the loss of a full third, 34% of Hawaii's whales during and immediately after the heat wave. So just absolutely shocking. And it's really wild because, up here in those sort of the Southeast Alaska in particular, those wonderful inside passage waters, Glacier Bay saw a total breeding failure. A lot of whales disappeared. A lot of whales showed up, in poor body condition. But to imagine the scope and the scale of it, we couldn't ever have done that without everyone coming together. And to me, that's like, this is what, successful modern science, and I don't say that to toot my horn because I really had like no concept that we could actually be successful. And most of the success ultimately was driven by other people's vision and me just happening to show up with some pretty nice tech. But yeah, we think that that 7,000 whales died, probably mostly of starvation because of the heat wave. And I'm going to say that I'm very convinced of that, but I feel like there's a fair bit more science to be done to show that they didn't just say relocate. But that is actually part of what I guess I should probably wrap up here fairly soon. But part of this reality is spoken of in their migratory patterns. But one more point about this, and I'm sorry, I think it's the last graph in the talk, boring things that they are. That population impact was to Hawaiian whales. The way we did this mark recapture study was, yeah, I'm going to skip the methods. You can read about it. But it's basically looking at individual whales and resighting those whales next summer, next year, following summer, following winter, so on and so forth. So recapture of individuals and using that to configure a model to see, okay, so how many whales are there year by year by year? The Hawaiian whales just absolutely crashed. And it's actually, I find it interesting that there's more volatility apparent in the Hawaiian population as compared to, and this is above, these are relative estimates. So the numbers on the left kind of don't mean that much. Yes, there's more whales in Hawaii than in the set that we measured in Mexico, but the way we measured it, we can't really define the limits of, is that all of Mexico's whales or is it just the Banderas Bay and Sayulita whales? So not to belabor the mechanics of it, don't take the numbers here, take the trends. And the trend is growth, 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 very strong growth in Hawaiian whales, hence being taken off the endangered species list. But then a severe drop such that by At this point now, or by the end of our study, we wrapped it up in 2021 as far as the stats go, the whales were back to their population in 2006. So quite a dramatic reversal of that recovery. And I think that that is actually an artificially low number. My sense, and this is kind of a gut feeling, is that the peak population that we had, this peak here, that in 2013 we measured 33,000 whales in the North Pacific, or estimated that. My sense is that's about the ocean basin wide pre-whaling numbers. I don't think it would have been lower than that. I don't think it would have been a lot higher than that. I doubt it would have been, say, over 40,000 whales or something like that. No, one could make that argument. I'd listen to it for sure. Mexican whales, boy, really just this wonderfully strong, stable, gradual growth all along the way, right? And this is northern Mexico, not the Central American ones, where different things are happening. And they're, well, going to go on about that for a long time. But so, so there's I'm actually trying not to look at the Q&As here, but I did see Jody Frediani. Hi, Jody. First question here is, do we really lose that many whales after the blob, or did they go offshore to feed, or simply aren't being observed? Well, it's a darn good question and a very natural one. And I don't think I've actually fully convinced many of my co-authors here, but partially because it's just so hard to grasp that many whales dying from the heat wave. And it's not heat stress that they died from. It is that warmer waters produce less food. So when the waters were warmer in the Gulf of Alaska and Southeast Alaska in particular, you had less food overall, you had more dispersed food and deeper food, all three of which really, really hit these large consumers hard. And that's why we called it the bellwethers of change, is that when a marine heat wave comes, guess who suffers? Well, we can see the health of the oceans in these populations because we now have this we now have the mechanics to see that healthy or not healthy situation. And so what I really worry about is, gosh, today's heat wave might be the average temperature in 20, 50, 100 years. And then we have a real problem. What we see now, and so specifically about the migration, and specifically to Jody's question, where did the whales go? Did they go somewhere else? Well, guess what? Not at all. And this is so surprising to me because these migratory patterns, we see, that story with Top Gun, who came from the Commander Islands and relocated to Southern California. That's not that rare. I mean, that one's extreme, but whales relocating, or much more commonly, just like being seen once in, California whale seen once in Alaska. Yeah, it happens. Or the next population up south, British Columbia, happens all the time. And it's not just juveniles. I mean, we had a whale seen twice in Colombia and over 10 years. So this is clearly an adult whale, and then showed up in Tanzania. Like, that's really far away. That's skipping multiple populations, or maybe it hung out in those populations for some time. But 97% of encounters were of whales that we could say by their sighting history what their home range was, breeding areas and feeding areas. 97% of those encounters were in their home range. These whales do what they do, and they do it consistently. And so we went further to test that. Glacier Bay in particular is a very, very well-studied area. And the whales of Glacier Bay very consistently go to Hawaii. There's lots of sampling around. We see the same whales. I've actually never even been to Glacier Bay, but I seem to know the whales pretty well there. Janet Nielsen, Chris Gabriel, two fantastic biologists that I've gotten to share this work with. Janet has followed these individuals. Not a single whale that disappeared during the heat wave has shown up anywhere else. Not one. There's no whaley Atlantis out there. There's just no place that they could be feeding in and breeding in that isn't sampled, right? I mean, sure, there's plenty of whales that we're not going to document. There's plenty of whales that, they habitually feed on the outer coast of Alaska, which, there's just not much sampling now in the Gulf of Alaska, except for in inside waters like Prince William Sound, or, Sitka gets offshore whales and such. But, there's a lot of whales we're missing out there for sure. You have whale that breeds in the Leeward Islands of Hawaii for sure. They do, well, I wouldn't say equally, we don't know, but they do definitely mix into the main Hawaiian Islands. But, there's just no, we would capture them. We would capture some of them if they were relocating. They are not. And we actually did a GLM, a generalized linear model, did all this great stats to see if the in and out migration rates, because there is this variance, right? Whales are going to different places all the time. But to see if the rates of that change during the heat wave, not at all. The whales, and what a trip, right? Imagine you got a summer job in Alaska, right? You get your vacation in Hawaii, surf, you have a great old time, find a mate. You go to Alaska every summer for your summer job. You show up, no work. There's no work. You've been laid off of that job. Cool. Okay. You go around the next corner and find another job. Keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. Oh, you never found a job. You basically scraped barely by. You go back to Hawaii. You're not in the greatest condition. You go back to Hawaii. Do you go back to Alaska again? Yes, they did. And that for 3 years straight and kept on, right? So now we have the survivors and the whales that disappeared during the blob, and none of them went elsewhere. And it's just really shocking and really wild. And I'll kind of wrap it up with that. I guess the point there is that climate change is the big threat here. Climate change can exacerbate entanglement. It can exacerbate, ship strikes by causing whales to move locally. North Atlantic right whales have really suffered for this. But it is also in and of its own. It's not a force multiplier. It is a force, and it's a trip because current literature doesn't actually recognize climate change as a risk to humpback whales. And I think that's kind of our blind spot, right? So, that's a big old downer because the hardest problem is, I think, the biggest one. But the upside of this, oceans are sensitive, but they're also resilient. These animals are sensitive, but they're also resilient. We look at that population recovery. Yes, 30% of Hawaii's whales are down. Yes, 20% North Pacific overall. But that's after recovering from 97% down or somewhere in that ballpark. So I really want to end this with a focus on the bright side of it, which is that we can turn this train around. Oceans are resilient. These animals are resilient. This is not a North Pacific humpback. This is actually a calf that my father photographed, rest in peace, in the Silverbank. This whale, in its natal summer or natal winter, had already been entangled. You can see those two scars on the tail. But and I don't think we've ever seen the whale again. But that could just be the hard to recognize a calf fully from its first few months. But these whales are they are resilient, and and I hear tell it took some years. It seemed that the birth rate was really still down for a while, well after the marine heat wave. But I hear tell that this summer has been a bumper crop of humpback whales in Glacier Bay and all around Southeast Alaska. So look, I mean, I think the best lesson with these animals is if you want something to thrive, stop killing it. And we got to think, it's not just whaling right now. We got to think about the whole of what makes for a healthy ocean. And kind of one last little bit here before I ended up, the real joy of this work is not just my own treasure chest to dig into, but really serving on in the many ways in which this collaborative work has served other research or research built on pieces of this. It seems I've heard it called, I think it was Andy Zabos of Alaska Whale Foundation called it critical infrastructure. for the science. We support a study that Alaska Whale Foundation and University of Hawaii Manoa is doing of body condition, and it's so cool. I mean, first off, that you can fly a drone over a whale and measure their biometrics, measure their volume, measure their health and condition. That in and of itself is just this conceptual leap. It's awesome. But then the whale dives and you photograph the tail, and then you do it again and you photograph that same whale a week later, a month later, 6 months later, 2 years later. You can see that whale on top, that mama. You can actually watch that 2 millimeters of her body, of her girth a day is being handed over to that baby in the form of some of the richest milk made on the in the animal kingdom, so that that baby can put on 100 pounds a day and grow an inch a day. And then that mom, she takes that calf to Alaska and feeds that whale, and she is actually not gaining weight. And I get goosebumps because I just think it's so incredible that we can watch this and we can monitor the health of the oceans through the health of these animals. I think they're obviously intrinsically beautiful in their own rights, but the health of the oceans is critical, not just to them, but to us too. And with that, I'll end on kind of what's next for us. I've finished my PhD, and there's a lot of the when I finish my PhD, we will XYZ, and one of those is taking the conceptual leaps we've made, the ability to automate this, the ability to gather data at this scale, the ability to get researchers to work together, the ability to have a positive experience for citizen scientists. Yeah, that's who my whale is. Cool. Or, oh, hey, wow, my whale's been seen down in Mexico today. Awesome. With a new calf, right? To extend this onward, we can now ID many species. We have a dorsal fin algorithm that works really well. We've got a lot of infrastructure to build. So to make this work like it does for humpback whales for essentially nearly all cetaceans, it's a long trek, but one that we can do, honestly. Yeah. If we have the funds, we can do it in even in a year. I don't know. Working on it. And to the 8,000 photo contributors whose data, whose photos, whose efforts, and whose love and time and caring and willingness to share their images made this all possible, and to my many research collaborators, just so wonderful to do this. And I will end it there, and delighted to take any questions.